The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Commito and Steve Gravel. Presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.
I'm intervening on behalf of the listeners. Steve was about to do a hoot, maybe an owl impression, because our guest today, Brit Ho, works at Hootsuite. So again, we're not going to do Brit or Hootsuite the disservice of having Steve do his best owl impression.
Save me from myself.
We are saving him from himself for the good of the listeners, of course. So again, welcome
this is,
back.
Of course, the Unlikely Innovators.
Yeah, this is the actual intro. This is not a blooper reel.
Yeah, we're backing into the episode today. We're backing into it. Yeah.
This is how we're starting. But we had a really good conversation, really good vibe with Brit from Hootsuite. So Brit is a project and program management professional. She's been with Hootsuite for over 7 years. So we got to kind of go down her journey with her. She started off in hospitality, a bit of an unlikely or unconventional path, but I think the way Brit explains it, not that unlikely, which is often how we learn about our guest journeys, is that what may appear unlikely on the outside isn't all that unlikely. I think there's a lot of parallels between, what she'd learned in her studies in hospitality to what she was doing in tech when she first started, and certainly now, working with internal stakeholders at Hootsuite that are also enabling businesses outside of the enterprise to kind of come up with ways to meet their goals, and we got into AI and some other cool things, and also towards the end, talked about some of Brit's passions. But I don't want to spoil that too much. But Steve, what did you take away from our chat with Brit?
Well, I'm going to be a bit reflective, if you'll allow me.
Of course.
I think when the final word is written about the message that the Unlikely Innovators has brought to the world, I think what we will find is that most of the Unlikely Innovators that we have on the show, what it will show is that the best run organizations look for talent in non-obvious places, and those that are willing to take a chance on someone that doesn't have a background that meets the exact title that they're posting for are much richer for it. So I think what we'll find is, if you could take this as a document, these group of episodes we've done over the last 3 years, I think will be a ringing endorsement for looking for the unconventional backgrounds in the world and harnessing them.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. And I think let's just go right to that, because I think Brit's got some great insights on her own path. And I think especially with unlikely paths and why that's so needed to have different perspectives in sectors like tech, but everywhere, I think is a really important thread in this episode. So let's go right to Brit. Okay, so we're back. We're pleased to be joined by Brit Ho. Brit is a project manager and program management professional with over 7 years of experience working in tech. She launched her career in marketing at Uber and then joined Hootsuite to build out the customer marketing program. Since then, Brit has transitioned over into project management to drive and deliver on product strategy. In her day-to-day, Brit works cross-functionally to enable her stakeholders to execute on their business goals within the organization. As co-chair of the Asian ERG at Hootsuite, she is also passionate about enabling individuals to use their diverse strengths to pursue leadership positions in the workplace and community. She's also change management certified and works with teams to operate in agile product environments. Outside of her work, Brit is also deeply connected to the local boxing community in Vancouver and is always Googling a new recipe for dinner. And now she is a guest on the Unlikely Innovators. Brit, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. And, on this show, as the name implies, we like to talk about unlikely journeys and unlikely innovation. And one of the things we wanted to start with you is your journey. And I think what's interesting is that you started off in hospitality and worked your way into tech. So maybe if we could start there and talk about what may seem like an unlikely journey, but maybe it's actually not after we kind of hear it from you.
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I think like a lot of young students, I was really torn as to what do I do next? What do I spend my next 4 years heads down studying? And at the time, I had a career advisor in school being like, "Hey, you really like working with people. And there's this great hospitality program out east at the University of Guelph. It's a business program, but then you would major in hospitality. Why don't you give that a go?" And I was like, you know what? That sounds pretty good. I do like people. I like to eat. I like to travel. Hospitality sounds like a good fit. So I liked the idea of it. I loved hospitality. I went over, studied my 4 years. It was a co-op program. And in my last summer before my last year of school, so it was like my last summer timeframe, I was like, you know what, this is my last chance to kind of do something maybe more fun before I get locked down into a full-time job. And so at that point, I was like, well, I still kind of want to get some experience on my resume. Let me just look at all the companies that I think are very cool right now. And I'm just going to see if they have internships. And so at the time, Uber was just kind of starting up in Canada. Obviously, they were a little bit more established in the States, but really just getting going in Toronto. So they had a marketing internship. I applied, and then 6 interviews later, I got the role. So that was my first foray into tech, which is really interesting. It was a crash course, obviously a very high paced, really interesting industry to work in with Uber. But what was interesting to me and what kind of gave me confidence as well was that a lot of the skills that I had learned from hospitality and a lot of that kind of people interaction, a lot of those skills can be transferred over into tech. So from a hospitality perspective, you might think about your guest and what is that guest experience or, that customer experience. Whereas in tech, we think about our users and how that they experience our products. And so really, I think a lot of the things that you think about or the storylines that you might go through are very similar. And I think a lot of it ultimately boiled down to me asking myself what I really like doing and what kind of industry and what kind of pace I liked working at. And so after I graduated, I was like, you know what, I'm going to give tech a shot. I continued working for Uber for a bit, and then I came over into Hootsuite. So a little bit of an unconventional path, but I like to think, like I said, a lot of the skills can be transferable. And tech isn't just, one dimensional. There's so many different facets to it. There's so many different roles within it. And I really think that, everyone can kind of find a place.
I think that's really interesting, Brit, because a lot of the time when you talk to people who write about tech or who think about tech, customer service is not exactly the first thing that jumps off the page. We have a tendency to sometimes be impersonal when we think about a tech product, but that's so
Mm.
important and valuable to bring that sort of experience. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. So if I think like when people hear that kind of customer service, they might think of more of a support format, or, obviously, yes, there's interactions there. And you do have to have kind of more of that hospitality persona when you work in CS, but I also think that can be applied to other functions. So, for example, I think any good product manager should be really thinking about their user and what is that experience? What is their ultimate goal and need? And are they accomplishing that successfully through their tool or whatever product you're selling? And so, while it might be a little bit more obvious than a support function, I think that really any person working in tech and servicing a user like that should be thinking about what is that customer. My role is mostly internal, and I kind of flip it on to who is my internal customer? What does the stakeholder need? What are they looking for? And how can I help connect that need in a way that makes sense to the program or the project? So I think obviously some use cases are a little bit more obvious, but I like to think at Hootsuite we're really customer obsessed in a good way. And for us, that just translates to us kind of taking a step back in our day to day and thinking, okay, what is the need here? Who am I working with? And how can I help them get to that?
For sure. And I used to work at a group called OCE. They're called OCI now. And I remember that when we moved our office to Front Street, Hootsuite was on the way up the
Okay.
stairs. You guys had a
Yeah.
Toronto office right at Front Street, and I'm like, they're doing some really incredible things in there. I mean, of course, we touch tech all the time at that job. It was just the nature of what we were doing. But one of the things you always hear is, Canada's tech ecosystem is probably second to maybe only what's going on in California. Um, but then I hear you talk about customer service and things of that nature, which are very Canadian, homegrown concepts. What do you think differentiates? This is a more wider question. What do you think differentiates Canadian tech? And what good things are you seeing happening in the BC ecosystem where you are?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's funny, I've been working in tech for almost over 7 years. And even within that short time frame, I feel like I've seen a lot of change over the last few years, and especially with remote work becoming a little bit more prevalent. I think people then were less bound by physical boundaries, and it starts to boil down to more of like, where is this talent, and can we have them as a part of our company? And so from a Canadian perspective, I feel like one of our differentiators is, and this is a little bit of a cliche, but I do feel like we are nice. and
Yeah.
and like one thing I think about at Hootsuite specifically actually is I think we hire really well. Like we hire people that are passionate about what they do. They're good at what they do. And then ultimately, I'm like, I would actually hang out with these people after work, which I don't think you can say about every single company. And so I really do feel like there is some sort of cultural element. And it could be because we generally have a pretty diverse population. You know, our immigration policies are different from a few other companies. And I think that contributes, or sorry, countries. And I think that contributes to the overall diversity of our country. And then all the then ultimately the diversity in the workforce. And so I really do feel like that's a business benefit to a lot of tech companies here. And then specifically in BC, like BC is really growing. It's a great place to live. It's beautiful. And so I think we're attracting a lot of really great talents who again recognize they don't necessarily have to be in the Silicon Valleys of the world. You know, they can live elsewhere and have just as fulfilling a career. And so I really do feel like remote work has enabled Canadian talent to, you know, find more confidence in their talent and get hired remotely. And then I think we also have a really great education system. Like, you know, Waterloo is a really great, you know, education hub for a lot of those technical roles. And really in general, like a lot of our universities and our education is top tier and really getting recognition for that and has for a lot of years now. So I think that ultimately contributes to our tech scene really growing. I really do feel like our niceness is a nice workplace perk, and it just makes you want to show up every day and be with your coworkers and be able to focus on the actual work that matters.
Yeah, that's Steve and I have had a couple guests on before, and one of the guests actually like she subscribes to there's a book called The No Asshole Rule at Work. And like that's so key. And again, I know that you're not always going to get along with everybody at work, and you're not going to necessarily, you know, be friends with everybody at work. But I think the idea of the litmus test of being like, can I hang out with this person after work? Because oftentimes going on work trips, like you're with these people after work hours, you're basically, you know, living abroad with them for a couple of days away from your home. So I do think that is an underrated thing. And to be able to have that at your workplace is such a gift, because not everybody has that. And you could see how the lack of that cohesion, the lack of, you know, collegiality leads to all sorts of other challenges in the workplace, right?
Totally. And I think maybe earlier in my career, I was spending more time with people that were probably more similar to me. So in, you know, similar places in life and similar ages. And then as I matured, I realized that like, that kind of diversity is really great. But then B, like I get along with you, whether you are a, you know, 22-year-old intern or whatever it is, versus like another director who might be older with a family and have a different lifestyle. But ultimately, because we have a lot of the same values,
Yeah.
and a lot of the same, again, like passions about how we show up at work and the things that we're doing, I'm able to hang out with, you know, anyone within that range or whatever that looks like. And so I think that, again, it boils down to like not just hiring people that look like you or similar to you. And oftentimes you don't want that, but you're bringing in a lot of different perspectives and still ultimately able to connect. So we actually just had a on-site with our product team yesterday, and I was like, man, I really missed having everyone here, and it was so nice to meet some of my colleagues from overseas, and just be able to really talk strategy. So really sometimes missing that human interaction, and I'm glad that at Hootsuite I can come in and go to the office when I want to, but it really is something that I think is truly special.
Well, and on the subject of hiring, Britt, like one of the things we wanted to ask you is like, you know, we've talked about where you get your talent from, and obviously I think having a diverse like workforce is key to any business, especially in tech. But But where does Hootsuite like pull its talent from these days? Are you guys looking for, somebody with that tech experience, or, somebody with a more unconventional path that brings a different perspective? I guess maybe can you talk a little bit about the philosophy behind how you guys actually, populate a diverse workforce at Hootsuite?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will say I can't really choose between the two. Like, we have a really good range of people that come in from externally, have really great, SME type knowledge, who really bring that to the table. But then at the same time, I think Hootsuite's really good at recognizing that, again, people come from a lot of different backgrounds, and some of those skills might be transferable. So, for example, I think I'm actually a really good example of that, because I started my career at Hootsuite in marketing. I was hired on to manage our ambassador program at the time. It grew into a little bit of a customer marketing role. And then at that time, I was like, you know what, marketing's been really awesome. I kind of want to see what the product side of work is. And we had an associate project manager role open up. I applied and came over internally into our product team. And even before that, we have this program at Hootsuite called Stretch, which is what I like to call like an internal internship program, because you spend about a quarter working on a specific project with a different team, which is such a great learning opportunity. It builds empathy between teams. You're able to, as like a person, discover a new way of working, and in some ways test out, like, would I like working in this function, or I'm now gaining a true understanding of what this team really does. And so I think we've been really supportive of that internal movement. And I think in a lot of other companies, people get really discouraged because they feel like, oh, I'll never be able to get into that role because I don't have that formal experience. Whereas I think at Hootsuite, we actually have been really open to it. We have a lot of product managers that come from analyst roles, success roles, et cetera. And so we do see a lot of movement. At the same time, I think we're always looking for some of the best in the business. And so when we open up roles, I think we always post them externally as well as internally. And it's a rule that we kind of have to post both and make internal peeps aware that there is an opportunity to be able to encourage people to apply and, again, get that diversity. But then also look for people outside who have something new to bring to the table. And so I think it's always a bit of a balance of finding, like, again, how do we get a fresh perspective, but then also enabling those within Hootsuite to be able to grow and flex their skills. I think from a PMO perspective in my team, we actually are, again, a good example of that, because myself and my colleague Steph, we've both been at Hootsuite for like 7-8 years. And then we also have our VP and another senior program manager who's external and have like a ton of really great experience from other companies. So I think especially in some of those internal facing roles, it's good to have a mix, and we're able to learn so quickly from each other and share some of those experiences.
Yeah, and I want to pick up a little bit more on diversity, if I could. Mike and I, we sort of operate in our day jobs, I should say, in like the mining and natural resource sector. And it's not exactly, it's going through some really important changes as it relates to diversity and diversity hiring, and a lot of great programs, but there's still tons of work to do in that sector. I think we're definitely lagging, but tech seems to be one that's sort of leading the way a little bit when it comes to diversity. At least in comparison from the perch that we sit in. So maybe can you talk a little bit about what more work needs to be done in tech, and how having a more diverse sector can actually lead to more innovation? Because I think it's important for our listeners to hear that as well.
Yeah, totally. And I think as someone who's thinking about DE and I and A a lot of the time, and co-chairing our Asian ERG, one thing I think about is about, like, how do we celebrate wins and recognize that there is progress, but also not be satisfied with what we have. And I think about that a lot, especially as an Asian woman. And so one thing that I think we can do a little bit more in tech is also, like, not just say, it's Pride Month or whatever it is, here's this one opportunity. I think it's really easy to say, like, here is an outlet, one single for you to feel or identify as an ally. But then also, like, really it boils down to what are those day-to-day experiences like? Obviously, yes, it's great to have those celebrations and those events, but how are we actually making people feel comfortable in their roles? And how do we enable them to show up day to day and be their genuine self and feel safe doing that and enabled? And so at Hootsuite, we recently launched this micro course that speaks to DEI on social. And so we're also thinking about, like, how can we also help our users think about this, especially people who are on social media. Like, if you're doing business on social media, you need to understand DEI as well. You need to understand your audience. And so we have this micro course, which I think is really cool. Shout out to our learning team. But that's where users hear from experts explaining what diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility looks like on social media, and then how to implement that into their social strategy online. So it's really kind of like a practical take on this. And for us, that's also something that we've enabled and opened for our internal peeps as well. Like, I can take this course, I have looked at it. And so from my perspective, I think there's been so many studies, name whatever business research function, they've shown that diversity is the right thing, not only from, again, a DEI and A perspective, but also from a business perspective. Like, having those different perspectives literally leads to better business. And so I think from us, it's not only the right thing to do, but it's also necessary for our success as a company, and also for enabling our users to really think about, again, how do they reach those audiences? How do they better understand their own users? And how can we support them in telling those stories?
Yeah, and it's interesting because the guest that we had on prior to you, her name's Chloe Arsenault from where we are in Sudbury, and she's the one of the things in the conversation we talked about her is that obviously in skilled trades, like, women are still very underrepresented in the skilled trades, and we talked about how, like, there's a lot of great events every year, like Jill of all trades, but that's a once a year thing. And we had asked her a similar question, like, what else can we be doing throughout the year to encourage women and girls to consider a path in skilled trades, right? Because after that celebration's over, it's great, but there's still more work to be done the other 364 days of the year.
Exactly. This leadership role that I've taken with our ERG is newer to me. And before I applied for it, I really had to do a little bit of introspective thinking to be like, what does it mean for me to show up as a leader in my workplace and really try and champion this? And am I doing that in my day-to-day as well? And also, like, telling myself I have to also be humble and honest, and people will probably keep me honest and give me feedback as I go through and learn and grow as well. And so I think part of it is also asking yourself how you show up every day, and making very conscious decisions to change the language that you use, to start calling out colleagues that might be underrepresented, to say, like, hey, congrats, you did a really good job on this, nominating them for opportunities or awards that they might not have a seat at the table at. Usually I actually attribute so I mentioned I moved over to product about a few years in, and there's two women specifically who I feel like really pushed me for the opportunity. One of them was an old mentor, and she used to be a manager of mine, who had heard I was kind of looking to move over into product, and she'd heard of this, like, project on the product side, and she said, hey, I know you're looking for someone to do this. Brit would be a really good candidate, and she doesn't have that experience right now, but, like, I think she could do it. And so she really brought my name into that conversation. And then another woman, Jen, she was really like my champion and mentor throughout my first few days in product. And we used to have these coffee chats, and she was always so positive and being like, no, Brit, you can do this. You can figure it out. I believe in you, and you have to believe in yourself. And so when I also think about, like, how do we, again, enable others, and how do we make our workplace a good place to work, it's also like, how can I enable those around me, and not just performatively, but also, like, really just recognizing when there's been good work, and taking the time and effort and opportunity to call that out. So yeah, I like to think of it at, obviously a macro perspective, challenging our own leaders to really think about this and implement different policies and strategies, but then also at a micro level, like how am I showing up day to day? What environments am I creating when I host meetings, et cetera? And how can I build that into my everyday working style?
For sure. And Britt, I'm going to change gears a little bit. I'm going to talk about work, unfortunately. But fortunately, I don't think, people who are in tech adjacent sectors or people who use social media might know what Hootsuite is, but I realized we didn't really just define what it is, Hootsuite is, and it might not be obvious for everyone, but it should be. You guys are quite a large tech firm now, but maybe 30 seconds on Hootsuite for me, and then I do have a question about AI and what investments. We're hearing about AI more and more, in our everyday lives than ever before. I just wanted to know what investments Hootsuite might be making in the space, and how AI might be enabling some of the processes and services that you offer clients. So first, tell us a bit about Hootsuite. We've been really enjoying hearing about you, but maybe we'll pay a bit of love to Hootsuite at the same time.
Sounds good. So Hootsuite at its core is a social media software company. We enable our customers to be successful on social. So that looks like a lot of different ways. You can create content and essentially post on social, all the way up to thinking about social selling, social customer care, and a lot of those more kind of enterprise or more complex use cases. And at Hootsuite, I feel like we understand that social as an industry and even as a user, like on Instagram or whatever, it can feel really crowded. And the industry in some ways is no exception. It's moving so quickly. There's so many changes all the time, and it can feel hard to keep up. So one thing we think about when we're building product is how do we enable organizations to build audiences into like engaged advocates? How do we help them listen to their users and know what they want to see and do? How do we enable them build the right content to reach those people and grow their business? I think ultimately it boils down to knowing that social is table stakes. I think at this point as a business, it's no longer that, oh, I'll give it to the intern role. Like, I hate that analogy because it was so true. I did social media
For
as an
sure.
intern as well, but now, like, I think businesses have to recognize it is a strategic role. You need someone who understands social deeply to be able to connect with your audience on social. And then interestingly enough, I feel like as an industry and like as businesses, there was a time where I felt like people were creating really polished content. And obviously for some industries, that's probably still true. But I think as we all become more savvy on social, people are looking for more genuine content. They want to know who you as a person or who you as a business really are. And so we're trying to help people navigate kind of that change and, again, identifying with their users. You mentioned AI. So one of the things that I think we try and help our users do that is in April, we released what we call Hourly Writer AI, which is our AI powered content generator. Because content creation can be so tough sometimes. Like, you have to do it constantly. You have to be creative. Not only do you have to think about the written content, but you need to think about the creative designs, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on. And so for us, we're like, well, we can help our users with this one step to combat the struggles of content creation. So it's a step-by-step tool. It requires very little information to generate post ideas and captions for users. So again, when I take a step back, obviously AI is like a very hot topic. We've all seen the billion LinkedIn posts around it, about leadership. But from my perspective, what I like at Hootsuite is that I feel like we really took kind of a personal approach to be like, okay, AI is obviously hot. We're not just going to build any solution. Let's build something that we feel like our users can truly use and find value in. So I was really excited to see that go out the door. I actually worked very closely with that team who released it. So I was very proud of the work that they did. And I can't wait to see kind of where that goes and how we'll build upon that.
One of my favorite things right now is seeing some of like the nightmare fuel results of AI generated things. There was this thing going around this week where somebody used an AI tool to create a Blue Jays commercial, and it's horrifying. So if you haven't seen it yet,
Oh
it's
yeah.
been picked up in the news cycle because of like the kids are eating hot dogs, but then the hot dogs turn into their arms and they're eating.
Oh,
It is
geez.
yeah. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. But again, I think the tools you're talking about is the AI that we're all looking forward to, and not these dystopian nightmares that I see on my social feeds. But Britt, we're almost at the end of our time with you, and we obviously would be remiss if we didn't touch on some of I think that, not that your whole bio is not interesting, but there are some things that jumped out to us at the end more on the personal side that we would be remiss not to kind of talk about. You know, you'd mentioned that you're deeply connected to the local boxing community in Vancouver, and you know, we often hear, maybe we don't hear this that often anymore, but I always, when I hear boxing, I think of the sweet science metaphor. So we wanted to ask you, like, do you subscribe to that metaphor, and maybe what does that mean to you, and maybe just a little bit on how you got into boxing, and what's kept you active and involved in the sport?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I feel like this is a good way to tie it all together because I started boxing recreationally. A friend was like, "Hey, I'm just going to try this class. Do you want to go with me?" And I was like, "Sure." I've been working out. This is kind of fun. And when I went to the class and did it, I remember thinking, like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I love that about this. But what I like about boxing is that, like, very few people are actually really naturally talented at boxing. And so in some ways, when you're starting out, it's very equalizing. It doesn't matter if you're like a huge gym person, very muscular. In some ways, sometimes that actually takes away from your ability to box. And so when I think about that sweet science metaphor, it really is interesting because boxing, I think, is like 99% hard work, and it's about what you put in and then getting the results after that. So I really do feel like in a lot of ways, it is scientific in that way. But then also, like, I think, especially when people watch boxing, it feels kind of rough, or it can feel very daunting. But boxing is actually very strategic. If you aren't one step ahead of your opponent, you're going to get punched in the face. And so I think we call it boxing IQ, to like know your setup, know your strategy. Not only do you have to be athletic, but you have to be really smart in some ways. So I definitely think it's a pretty good metaphor. I started, again, like I said, recreationally, and then I just loved it so much that the owners of the gym I was going to at the time was like, "What do you think about fighting?" And I was like, "Okay, I'll give it a shot." And then I ended up fighting for a few years before COVID hit, and then now I've transitioned to teaching, and I do still train with the competitive team at TCS here in Vancouver. So yeah, love it. I think it's a good time. Like, I think anyone can box. I really do believe that. And so it's a good sport.
That's unreal. Final thing to leave you with. Mike and I last year had the opportunity to come to Vancouver, and we probably gained 10 pounds because of the food that we were able to get.
And we were only there for 2 days, so that
Yeah,
speaks
I know. Yeah. The only thing that saved us is Mike insisted that we walk everywhere because it was so beautiful out, which I'm indebted to him for. We said in your bio that you enjoy cooking, but with so many culinary treats along the way, how do you make the choice to actually stay at home and cook? And if you do that, what can we expect Brit Ho to be making on a Friday night?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, one of the reasons why I box is probably so that I can try more restaurants.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Like, oftentimes I'll find inspiration from those restaurants. So I'll go out, try a dish, and be like, "Wow, this is really good. I'm going to try and make it at home." So it kind of goes both ways.
Right.
And it's funny that you say that. I actually keep a spreadsheet, as like any good project manager.
There you go.
But I keep a spreadsheet of all my favorite spots, and sometimes I'll look back, when I don't know what to make for dinner, and I'll be like, "Oh, what are some of my favorite dishes? Can I try making them at home?" I actually that really was something I was doing, especially with COVID and not being able to go out as much. And so yeah, I think it's always a bit of a balance. I love just exploring new cuisines. We have a ton of really great food here in Vancouver. It's true. I really feel like, especially our Chinese food here is like as good as literally in China or Hong Kong. So
Wow.
really spoiled for a lot of that choice. And then again, being on, having all those beaches and stuff, that means we had really great seafood. So
Yeah.
hard to choose. I also discover a lot through social media. So I will say that always helps. But yeah, sometimes it's just finding that hole in the wall spot, sitting down, and then thinking about how I can make it at home.
That's
Well,
awesome.
Yeah, and I mean that conference that Steve and I went to, it is every second year in Vancouver. So I think we'll have to hit you up for that spreadsheet the next
That
time
sounds good.
we're that way. So
Yeah, for sure. I will.
Well,
I've shared it with a lot of people, so you're always welcome to it.
oh,
okay,
that's
that's
good. So
great.
it's not like a secret list. That's good.
No.
That's good. So, Brit, thanks so much for joining us today. I think we had a great chat, and we're just really, super happy that you're able to join us, and inspired by your story, and happy to be able to give it to others. So, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me. It was awesome chatting with you. I've listened to a lot of your other episodes, so was really excited to be a guest on the podcast. So again, thanks for having me, and was awesome chatting with you both.
Pleasure was
Right on.
ours. Thanks, Britt.
Thanks.
Mike, we just had a great chat with Brit. It's so funny. I was just, sometimes when we're off camera, we're trying to decide who's going next, and in this case, I will go next. But great chat with Brit. Mike, I'm just remembering our sojourn in Vancouver last year. I had been there. I actually no, I had never been to BC before. But just getting off the plane and then, being on the ocean with the mountains in the background, there's really not too many places in the world like that, and I can't wait to go back for the next CIM event.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm actually surprised I didn't get a mountain tattoo after going to Vancouver, but I think it was probably because we didn't actually go in the mountains. I could see them
Yeah,
from the water, which
yeah.
to me was like a highlight just to be able to see them. But yeah, maybe
That was an Easter egg right
yeah, it
there.
was like a precursor to like, of
Yeah,
course this is gonna happen eventually.
yeah,
So no, I love Vancouver again. We weren't in there for very long, but I think it's just such a beautiful place. And
yeah.
as to Britt's point, like great food. But yeah, we will definitely be tapping into Britt's expertise with that spreadsheet. I think that was she at first she said the talk of boxing kind of tied it all together, but I really think the talk of her culinary pursuit tied it all together, because as a good project manager, she
Yeah.
of course like has the data to back it up and has the information stored. And I would love to get a peek at that spreadsheet, but I'm sure we will when we go to CIM next year.
Yeah, and I think like a good project manager, I'm sure it'll be annotated. It won't just be the name of the restaurant, it'll be what to get. So I think I'm willing to go there with her.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna have a like most people that I like their Excel sheet powers are probably much more superior than mine. So I'm
Yeah,
sure it'll blow my mind.
yeah, it'll be good.
As most spreadsheets do, it seems. So anyway.
So anyway, again, great speaking with Brit. Um, Great hearing about the good work going on at Hootsuite, of course, and just optimistic about where tech is going from a diversity perspective. Um, Last thing, Mike, have you ever boxed with boxing gloves?
You know what? So there was one time, this was probably in high school or early university, and we used to play poker in my one buddy's garage a lot, and obviously we would be drinking beers and other enlightening enhancemants. And one night somebody brought boxing gloves into the garage, and none of our friends boxed or knew how to box, but like we had all put on boxing gloves and tried to fight each other. And it did not go well for me. I think I got like one in the face, and like my eyes instantly watered because I got hit square in the nose, which is obviously the biggest target on my face. So I immediately took them off, and that was it for me. And that was the last time I've ever put boxing gloves on. So again, by no means have I boxed, but that was as
Yeah,
close as I've been. I like the aspect that Britt talked about with the strategy. I think of a lot of parallels with like, you're going to hate me, Steve, but hockey IQ, knowing where the puck is before it gets there. But I think to Britt's point, I think to have a cerebral mind can help you not get punched in the face. But I think you need to have all of that training before you get to that point. So definitely train before you get into a boxing match in the garage with your buddies, for sure, would be my advice. How about you? Have you ever been in the ring?
yeah, like a little bit when I was younger, and then my wife took up kickboxing not too long ago, and those gloves look rather pillowy. I just tell everyone that
They're
hasn't
not.
done it. They're not.
They're
It's
not.
honestly like wrapping a towel around a
Yeah.
baseball bat and hitting someone with
Yeah.
it. So, those that do boxing and actually get in fights like Brit has, more power to them, because it's much more than I'm willing to do.
Yeah, well, actually, I'll end this with a quick anecdote about my kid. You always talk to me like, what are some funny like French,
Yeah.
Fringlish things that my daughters say. So again, if the listeners haven't heard this before, my daughters both French is their mother tongue, so we speak French at home. I do my best to parlez-vous with them, but so it's allowed me to get some interesting phrases over the years. So one of Zoe's friends kickboxes, and so one day we asked her, like, would you be interested in kickboxing? And she said yes. And then we asked her, what does what do you think you do in kickboxing? And she said, kick la boîte, which means, a mix of like kick the box.
Yeah.
So we're like, oh no, there's a little bit more to that, but yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a Fringlishism in our house, kick la boîte. So anyway,
Yeah, my wife, and I'll leave you with this. My wife used to have a shirt that says, "She has style, she has grace, she'll kick you in the face."
well, I believe that.
Yeah.
I could see Tanya doing that. So anyway.
All right, everyone. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Commito and Steve Gravel. Presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.